When you woke up this morning, how many invisible gifts from the space race did you encounter before you even left your bedroom? Think about it for a moment. The mattress cradling your body as you opened your eyes, conforming to your weight, remembering your shape from 1,000 nights before. The phone on your nightstand, packed with more computing power than all of NASA possessed when they sent men to the moon, waiting silently to show you the weather, the news, messages from friends halfway around the world. The smoke detector mounted on your ceiling, watching over your family through the night with sensors originally designed for spacecraft. The scratch-resistant glasses you reached for, their lenses descended from technology that protected astronaut helmets. Every single one of these things, and hundreds more that fill your daily life, traces its origins back to a remarkable decade when humanity reached for the moon and accidentally transformed life here on Earth in ways nobody could have predicted. This is the story they rarely tell you, not the astronauts in gleaming spacesuits standing at attention on launch pads, not the rocket launches that lit up the Florida sky and set the ground trembling for miles, not the footprints in lunar dust that captivated a watching world and brought tears to the eyes of millions. No, this is the story of what happened in the laboratories and the factories, the quiet corners of the space program where engineers in short-sleeved shirts and pocket protectors solved problems for astronauts and inadvertently solved problems for everyone else on Earth. By the time Neil Armstrong stepped onto the Sea of Tranquility in July of 1969, the technology developed to put him there had already begun filtering into hospitals, kitchens, garages, and living rooms across America and around the world. The space race was never really about the moon. It was about pushing human ingenuity to its absolute limit. And when you push that hard, when you demand solutions to problems that have never been solved before, the benefits cascade into places you never expected them to go. Tonight, we are going to trace those cascades together. We are going to follow the threads from Cape Canaveral to your bedroom, from mission control to your medicine cabinet, from the lunar module to the cordless drill hanging in your garage. We are going to uncover a hidden history of everyday objects, revealing how the most ordinary items in your life carry extraordinary origins. So close your eyes if you like. Let your breathing slow. Let the worries of the day drift away. And let me take you back to a world that existed before all of this, a world that seems almost unimaginable now, where the technologies we take for granted had not yet been dreamed into existence. The late 1950s in America looked nothing like the world you know today. Picture a family gathered in their living room on a typical evening. They sit around a massive piece of furniture that dominates one corner of the room, a television set enclosed in a wooden cabinet the size of a small refrigerator. The screen itself is modest, perhaps 12 or 15 inches across, displaying images in grainy black and white. This family has 3 channels to choose from. 3, and all of them are broadcasting programming that originates within the borders of the United States. If something significant happens in Europe tonight, perhaps a speech by a world leader or a natural disaster, this family will not see footage of it for days, sometimes weeks. The film must be shot on location, loaded onto an airplane, flown across the Atlantic Ocean, processed in a laboratory, edited into a news segment, and finally broadcast. By the time they see it, the event is already history. Television is a local phenomenon, a window onto the nation, but rarely onto the world beyond. In offices and university basements across the country, machines called computers hum and click and whir. But these are not the computers you know. These are monstrous things, filling entire rooms, consuming enough electricity to power a small neighborhood. Their vacuum tubes glow with heat that requires special air conditioning systems to manage. Teams of technicians tend to them constantly, replacing burned-out components, feeding them punch cards, waiting hours for results. The most advanced of these machines can perform perhaps a few thousand calculations per second. Your wristwatch today, the cheap digital one you might wear while gardening, can outperform them without even trying. And the idea of carrying a computer in your pocket? In 1957, that notion would mark you as someone who reads too much science fiction, someone who has lost their grip on the practical limitations of the real world. In kitchens across the country, housewives face daily battles with food spoilage. Refrigerators help, certainly. The icebox that their grandmothers knew has been replaced by humming electric appliances that keep milk fresh and butter cold. But long-term storage of nutritious food remains a challenge. Canned goods lose their texture and much of their flavor. Frozen foods, still a relatively new convenience, take up limited freezer space and often emerge from thawing as pale shadows of their fresh selves. The sophisticated preservation techniques that will one day stock emergency kits and backpacker pantries with lightweight, long-lasting nutritious meals do not yet exist outside of military research laboratories. And even there, the results are questionable at best. In hospitals, the monitoring of patient health depends on nurses making rounds, checking vital signs at intervals, recording numbers on paper charts. If a patient's heart begins to falter at 2 in the morning, there is no alarm that sounds at the nursing station, no continuous readout that a doctor can watch from across the building. Diagnosis depends on observation and intuition as much as on technology. The miniaturized sensors that will one day watch over patients around the clock, transmitting data in real time, lie years in the future. This was America in 1957, prosperous, comfortable, technologically advanced by the standards of the day, and utterly unprepared for what was about to happen. On the evening of October 4, 1957, a faint beeping sound began emanating from radios around the world. Amateur radio operators picked it up first, then tracking stations, then ordinary people who happened to tune to the right frequency at the right time. The sound came from somewhere overhead, somewhere impossibly high, moving at a speed that boggled the imagination. Sputnik, the Soviets called it. The word meant traveling companion in Russian. It was a polished metal sphere, about the size of a beach ball, bristling with radio antennas, and it was circling the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour, completing an orbit every 96 minutes. The Soviet Union had beaten the United States into space. To American ears, that rhythmic beeping sounded less like the cheerful chirp of a traveling companion and more like a warning signal, a taunt from the sky. The nation that had won the Second World War, the nation that considered itself the undisputed technological leader of the free world, had just been humiliated in front of the entire planet. The Soviets could put objects in orbit. Could they put bombs in orbit? Could they drop nuclear weapons from space onto American cities? Fear rippled across the country. Parents looked up at the night sky and wondered what else might be watching from above. Politicians thundered about missile gaps and technological failures. Scientists who had been advocating for space programs suddenly found their telephone ringing off the hook. But alongside the fear came something else, something deeper and more powerful. Americans looked at that beeping satellite and felt something stir in their collective soul. Determination, resolve, a stubborn refusal to accept second place. Whatever it took, however much it cost, however many years of work lay ahead, America would not be left behind in this new frontier. Within months, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration came into existence. It swallowed up existing research facilities and began constructing new ones. Thousands of the brightest minds in the country packed up their families and moved to Florida, to Texas, to Alabama, to California. Engineers and scientists from universities and private industry joined a rapidly growing workforce dedicated to a single purpose, catching up to the Soviets and then surpassing them. The space race had begun in earnest, and with it, the greatest mobilization of scientific and engineering talent in human history, outside of wartime, would generate innovations that nobody could yet imagine. The young senator from Massachusetts who won the presidency in November of 1960 understood something profound about the American character. John Fitzgerald Kennedy had grown up with wealth and privilege, but he possessed an instinct for what motivated ordinary Americans. They did not want merely to keep pace with their rivals. They did not want parity or equilibrium or careful progress. They wanted to win. They wanted a goal so audacious, so seemingly impossible, that achieving it would prove American greatness beyond any shadow of doubt. Kennedy's scientific advisors cautioned him about making promises the nation might not be able to keep. The challenges of space travel were immense. The Soviet lead was substantial. Committing to specific goals with specific deadlines was politically risky. Kennedy heard their concerns and then ignored them. On May 25, 1961, standing before a joint session of Congress, the young president issued a challenge that made even his most optimistic supporters catch their breath. He committed the United States to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the decade was out. Less than 9 years to accomplish what many believed would take a generation. The engineers at NASA heard that deadline and felt a peculiar mixture of exhilaration and terror. The goal was magnificent. The timeline was insane. The challenges were staggering beyond anything the agency had yet attempted. Rockets powerful enough to escape Earth's gravity and reach the moon had not yet been built. The massive Saturn V that would eventually carry Apollo missions stood only in preliminary sketches. Navigation systems precise enough to cross 250,000 miles of empty space, avoiding all the things that could go wrong along the way, and arrive at a specific crater on a specific date did not yet exist. The mathematics had been worked out in theory, but translating theory into working hardware was another matter entirely. Life support systems capable of keeping astronauts alive in the vacuum of space for the week or more that a lunar mission would require were purely theoretical. No one had ever kept a human being alive in space for more than a few hours. The longest American spaceflight to date, Alan Shepard's suborbital hop just weeks before Kennedy's speech, had lasted all of 15 minutes. And then there were the computers. The onboard guidance computers needed to perform the calculations necessary for such a voyage, to monitor the spacecraft systems, to respond to emergencies, to navigate with pinpoint accuracy across distances so vast that a tiny error early in the journey would mean missing the moon by thousands of miles. Simply did not exist in any form that could be placed aboard a spacecraft. A computer of sufficient power in 1961 weighed several tons. It required enough electricity to power a small factory. It would have been too large to fit inside any rocket, too heavy to lift off the ground even if it could fit, too fragile to survive the violent shaking of launch, too unreliable to trust with human lives when the nearest technician was 250,000 miles away. Every single one of these problems demanded solutions, and every solution, born from the desperate necessity of meeting Kennedy's deadline, would soon begin transforming everyday life in ways that the president himself never imagined as he made his bold pronouncement. The pressure was immense. The budgets grew astronomical, eventually consuming 4% of the entire federal budget at the program's peak. And in laboratories and engineering facilities scattered across the country, brilliant minds bent themselves to tasks that had never been attempted before. The pace was relentless. Engineers worked 12-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week, month after month. Coffee machines ran constantly. Family dinners were missed. Birthdays were forgotten. The deadline imposed by Kennedy hung over everything, a constant reminder that there was no time to waste. In Huntsville, Alabama, Wernher von Braun led the team developing the Saturn V rocket, the massive launch vehicle that would carry astronauts to the moon. The challenges were staggering. The rocket needed to generate 7.5 million pounds of thrust to lift itself and its payload off the launch pad. Its first stage alone consumed 15 tons of fuel per second, emptying its tanks in just 2.5 minutes before falling away. The engineering tolerances were tighter than anything that had been attempted before. The slightest asymmetry in the engines, the smallest manufacturing defect could cause catastrophic failure. Von Braun insisted on redundancy everywhere possible. If one system failed, backup systems would take over. If backups failed, backups stood ready. In Houston, Chris Kraft was inventing mission control as he went along. No one had ever monitored and managed human spaceflight before. The protocols, the procedures, the communication systems, the decision-making processes, all had to be created from scratch. Kraft and his team developed the flight controller positions that still exist today, each specialist monitoring a specific aspect of the spacecraft, all coordinated by the flight director whose word was final. At MIT, the software team led by Margaret Hamilton was writing code for the Apollo guidance computer, working in a programming language that she had helped invent. The software had to handle every conceivable situation from normal operations to emergencies. It had to be absolutely reliable. Since there was no way to send a technician to fix a crashed computer on the way to the moon, Hamilton's team pioneered concepts that are now standard in software engineering. Priority scheduling, which ensured that the most critical tasks always got processed first. Asynchronous programming, which allowed the computer to handle multiple tasks simultaneously. And robust error handling, which allowed the system to recover from unexpected situations without crashing. These innovations would prove crucial during the Apollo 11 landing when the computer was briefly overwhelmed by excess data from a faulty radar switch. The software Hamilton's team had written recognized that it had too many tasks and began dropping the less critical ones, keeping the landing program running while displaying error codes to warn the astronauts. Without that elegant design, the first moon landing might have ended in disaster. In California, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, engineers grappled with the communications challenges of deep space. How do you send a signal 250,000 miles to the moon and back? How do you track a spacecraft precisely enough to navigate it to a specific landing site? How do you relay television images across that vast distance so that people on Earth can watch astronauts walking on another world? The deep space network that JPL built to solve these problems still operates today, monitoring spacecraft across the solar system. The antenna complexes in California, Spain, and Australia provide continuous coverage of the sky, allowing constant communication with missions to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond. The techniques developed for Apollo now guide rovers on the Martian surface and orbiters circling distant moons. What emerged from this pressure was nothing less than a revolution, and at its heart lay the challenge of shrinking a computer from the size of a building to something that could fit inside a spacecraft. The engineers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Instrumentation Laboratory received one of the first major contracts of the Apollo program. Their assignment seemed straightforward on paper: build a guidance computer for the Apollo spacecraft. This computer would need to perform thousands of calculations per second to navigate between Earth and Moon with pinpoint accuracy. It would need to monitor spacecraft systems, respond to astronaut commands, and handle emergencies when communication with mission control was impossible. On paper, straightforward; in practice, impossible by the standards of the day. The computer needed to be small enough to fit in a space roughly the size of a briefcase. It needed to be light enough that the rocket could actually lift it. It needed to be rugged enough to survive the shaking and vibration of launch, the temperature extremes of space, the radiation that bombarded anything beyond Earth's protective atmosphere. And above all, it needed to be reliable enough that it would not fail during the most critical moments of the mission. If the computer failed during the powered descent to the lunar surface, astronauts would die. If it failed during the rendezvous between the lunar module and the command module, astronauts would be stranded in lunar orbit with no way home. If it failed during re-entry, astronauts would burn up in Earth's atmosphere or skip off into space like a stone skipping across water. Failure was not an option. And yet the technology of the day simply could not meet the requirements. The MIT team tried building computers using transistors, the standard electronic components of the era. Transistors were reliable. They were well understood. Engineers had worked with them for years and knew their limitations. For over a year, the team struggled to make transistors work for Apollo. They could not. A computer built entirely from discrete transistors would never be small enough. It would never be light enough. There were simply too many components required, too many connections that could fail, too much weight and volume consumed. By late 1962, the MIT engineers reached an unavoidable conclusion. If they were going to build the Apollo guidance computer, they needed something new. They needed technology so cutting-edge that it had barely been proven in the laboratory, let alone in any practical application. They needed the integrated circuit. In a rapidly growing cluster of companies in and around Mountain View, California, engineers were experimenting with a radical idea that would eventually transform not just the space program, but human civilization itself. The concept was elegantly simple. Instead of wiring together individual transistors and resistors and capacitors on circuit boards, creating complex networks of separate components connected by hundreds of fragile solder joints, why not put all of those components onto a single tiny chip of silicon? Manufacture them together, connected from the start, on a surface no larger than a fingernail. Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments and Robert Noyce at Fairchild Semiconductor had both filed patents on versions of this idea around 1958 and 1959. Noyce's approach proved more practical for mass production. His company, Fairchild Semiconductor, occupied a modest building in Mountain View and was churning out the world's first commercially viable integrated circuits. The chips were tiny miracles of manufacturing precision. Each one contained multiple transistors and other components, all fabricated together on a sliver of silicon, all connected without the need for hand soldering. They were smaller than anything that had come before. They were lighter, and if they could be made reliable, they would be exactly what the Apollo guidance computer needed. The MIT engineers made a decision that many considered reckless. They would build their computer using these unproven integrated circuits. No one had ever attempted to build something so critical, something on which human lives would depend. using technology so new. NASA management was skeptical. IBM, which was building the computer for the Saturn V rocket, stuck with more conservative technology. Some engineers argued that the risk was too great, that proven components should be used even if they meant a heavier, less capable computer. But there was no other way to meet the requirements. The deadline demanded innovation, and so NASA became Fairchild's biggest customer, eventually purchasing over 60% of all the integrated circuits produced in America during the mid-1960s. The demand was enormous. The Apollo program needed thousands of chips for each guidance computer, and the program needed multiple computers. The manufacturing processes were imperfect, with many chips failing quality control, so even more had to be produced. Fairchild expanded rapidly, building new factories, hiring new workers, developing new techniques. The price of integrated circuits, initially astronomical, began to fall as production scaled up. Quality improved as manufacturers learned the subtle arts of silicon fabrication. Other companies entered the market, competing with Fairchild, driving further innovation. What nobody fully anticipated was what would happen once the Apollo program wound down. By then, the infrastructure for mass-producing microchips was firmly in place. The technology had been proven in the most demanding application imaginable. The costs had dropped to levels that commercial products could afford. And entrepreneurs began asking a question that would shape the decades to come. If we can fit a computer inside a spacecraft, what else might we fit a computer inside? The answer, as it turned out, was everything. The Silicon Revolution, born in the pressure cooker of Apollo, gave us pocket calculators in the early 1970s, devices that performed calculations faster and more accurately than any human, selling for prices that put them in every student's backpack. These early calculators seem quaint now, but at the time they were revolutionary. Slide rules, the calculation tools that engineers had used for generations, became obsolete almost overnight. The calculators gave us personal computers in the late 1970s and early 1980s, machines like the Apple II and the Commodore 64 that brought computing power into homes and small businesses. Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, building their first Apple computers in a California garage, were standing on the shoulders of the engineers who had created the integrated circuit industry to meet NASA's demands. The chips in their machines descended directly from the components that had guided astronauts to the moon. The personal computer revolution transformed work and play in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate now that we take computers for granted. Word processors replaced typewriters. Spreadsheets replaced pencil and paper calculations. Databases replaced filing cabinets full of paper records. The productivity gains were enormous, and they came from technology whose roots lay in the space race. Then came video game consoles, bringing interactive entertainment into living rooms. The processors that powered the Atari 216 and its successors were descendants of Apollo-era chips. Children who grew up playing Pong and Space Invaders and Pac-Man were being trained, without knowing it, in the skills of the digital age. Digital watches appeared, then digital cameras, then digital music players. Each generation of devices was smaller, faster, more capable than the last. Moore's law, the observation that chip density doubled roughly every 18 months, had been articulated by Gordon Moore of Fairchild Semiconductor back in 1965, even as his company was supplying chips for the Apollo guidance computer. That exponential progress continued for decades, carrying the Silicon Revolution far beyond anything Moore himself had anticipated. And eventually, decades later, it gave us the smartphones that now contain more computing power than all of NASA possessed during the entire Apollo era combined. Your phone can perform billions of calculations per second. It can store thousands of photographs, millions of words, entire libraries of music and video. It can communicate with satellites, access the collective knowledge of humanity through the internet, navigate you to any destination on Earth. All of this fits in your pocket. All of this runs for days on a single battery charge. All of this costs less than a single integrated circuit cost in 1962. When you tap on your phone to check a message from a friend, you are using technology whose lineage runs in a direct and unbroken line back to the guidance computer that steered Neil Armstrong to the moon. The engineers at MIT and Fairchild were trying to solve a space problem, trying to meet a deadline imposed by a president who understood the power of audacious goals. They had no idea they were laying the foundation for the digital revolution, but that is precisely what they were doing. And the world has never been the same. The women who helped make it possible deserve mention here, though their contributions went unrecognized for decades. At Raytheon's factory in Massachusetts, workers assembled the Apollo guidance computer's memory by hand, threading tiny wires through magnetic cores in precise patterns. The work required extraordinary dexterity and concentration. It was called little old lady work by some engineers, a dismissive term for labor that was anything but trivial. At Fairchild's factory in Shiprock, New Mexico, on the Navajo reservation, hundreds of women assembled integrated circuits under microscopes, soldering connections finer than a human hair. The company compared their work to traditional weaving, a comparison that patronized their skill while acknowledging its importance. These women, most of them anonymous in the historical record, quite literally wove the future into existence. The computers that guided astronauts to the moon passed through their hands. The technology that would transform civilization carried traces of their fingerprints. The space race's transformation of communication happened almost by accident, as so many revolutions do. Before the summer of 1962, live television was fundamentally a local phenomenon. You could watch events happening in your city or in other cities across the country if the television networks had invested in enough coaxial cables and microwave relay towers to carry the signal. But watching something happening on another continent, that was flatly impossible. The signals could not be sent that far. The curvature of the Earth blocked radio waves after a few dozen miles. International broadcasts required physically transporting film across oceans, a process that introduced delays of days or even weeks. Then, on July 10, 1962, a Delta rocket lifted off from Cape Canaveral carrying a payload that would shrink the world overnight. Telstar 1 was not much to look at. A small sphere, barely larger than a beach ball, covered in solar panels that gave it a faceted appearance, like a disco ball designed by engineers. It weighed only 171 pounds. Its power output was a mere 14 watts, less than a dim household light bulb. But this little satellite could do something that no technology had ever done before. It could receive a television signal transmitted from a massive antenna on one continent, amplify that signal using its modest electronics, and beam it back down to a receiving station on another continent thousands of miles away. Just hours after launch, history was made. A technician at a receiving station in Andover, Maine, took a small American flag and walked outside, waving it in front of the transmitting antenna. Across the Atlantic in France, viewers watched that flag waving in real time. The first live television image to cross an ocean was as simple as that, a flag in the wind, proof that the technology worked. Within days, more ambitious broadcasts followed. The Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower appeared on television screens simultaneously, a split-screen image that seemed to collapse the vast distance of the Atlantic into nothing. President Kennedy held a press conference that was watched live in 16 nations, including several countries behind the Iron Curtain, where officials could hardly pretend the American achievement had not occurred. Hundreds of millions of people on both sides of the ocean watched these early broadcasts. They saw baseball games and singing stars and political speeches. They realized that the world had changed, that distances which had always meant delays and separation now meant nothing at all. The journalist Walter Cronkite, watching from his anchor desk, marveled at the implications. Telstar had made the White House and the Kremlin no farther apart than the speed of light, he observed. The most powerful men on Earth could now watch each other in real time, witness each other's words and actions as they happened. The little satellite captured the public imagination so completely that a British pop group rushed to record an instrumental track named after it. Telstar by the Tornadoes topped music charts on both sides of the Atlantic. Its electronic sounds meant to evoke the futuristic wonder of a ball circling the heavens. The record sold 5 million copies worldwide, the first British song to reach #1 in America. People talked about Telstar at dinner parties and office water coolers. They looked up at the night sky and tried to spot the satellite passing overhead, though it was far too small to see with the naked eye. The word satellite itself, which had been an astronomical term referring to moons, entered common vocabulary as a synonym for orbiting technology. Television journalists breathlessly reported on each new milestone. When the satellite relayed footage of the Pope from Rome, or sumo wrestling from Tokyo, or a concert from Vienna, viewers marveled at the instant connection to distant places. The world was shrinking before their eyes, and everyone could sense that something fundamental had changed. Telstar 1 itself operated for only 7 months. Radiation from nuclear weapons tests in the upper atmosphere, specifically the Starfish Prime test conducted by the United States just one day before Telstar's launch, damaged its fragile electronics. The satellite fell silent in early 1963, a victim of Cold War military testing. But the revolution it started was unstoppable. Telstar 2 followed in May 1963, proving that the technology was reproducible. Other communications satellite programs accelerated. Engineers realized that satellites placed at exactly the right altitude, about 20 to 2,000 miles above the Earth, would orbit at exactly the same rate that the Earth rotated beneath them. From the ground, such satellites would appear to hang motionless in the sky, always above the same point, always available for communication. This concept, originally proposed by science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke in the 1945 magazine article, became the foundation of the modern communications satellite industry. Clarke had imagined a network of geostationary satellites providing global telecommunications coverage. By the end of the 1960s, his vision was becoming reality. The early Bird satellite, launched in 1965, became the first commercial communications satellite in geostationary orbit. INTLSat, an international consortium, began providing satellite telephone service across oceans. By 1969, when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, over 500 million people watched the event on live television, united in a moment of shared human triumph that would have been impossible just 7 years earlier. By the end of the decade, geostationary satellites provided continuous communication links across oceans. Television networks could broadcast live from anywhere on Earth to anywhere else. News events could be witnessed as they unfolded. The world became smaller with every passing year. Today, more than 3,000 operational satellites orbit our planet. They carry your phone calls and your text messages. They stream video to your television and data to your computer. They guide your car through unfamiliar streets. They tell ships at sea where they are and warn pilots of approaching storms. Every single one of them descends, technologically speaking, from that little 171-pound sphere that proved the concept on a summer day in 1962. Not all of the space race's gifts were electronic marvels. Some of the most impactful were surprisingly physical, materials and substances that found their way from spacecraft designs into products that millions of people use every day. In the mid-1960s, a quiet engineer named Charles Yost was working on a problem that seemed to have nothing to do with the moon. NASA, in addition to its primary mission of space exploration, had been given responsibility for improving aviation safety. The agency worked with airlines and aircraft manufacturers on everything from cockpit design to emergency procedures. One persistent problem was what happened to passengers during crashes. Aircraft seats of the era did a poor job of absorbing impact. People who survived the initial collision often died from injuries caused by the violent forces transmitted through their seats. Engineers sought better cushioning materials that could absorb energy and protect bodies from trauma. Yost had previously worked on the Apollo Command Module recovery system, studying how spacecraft absorb the brutal forces of splashing down in the ocean after returning from space. He wondered if similar principles could be applied to protect airline passengers. What he developed in a laboratory at NASA's Ames Research Center in California was a new type of foam. Unlike ordinary cushioning materials that simply compressed under pressure and sprang back when released, this foam behaved differently. It conformed to whatever was pressing against it, distributing force evenly across the entire contact surface. When the pressure was removed, it slowly, almost reluctantly, returned to its original shape. Yost called it temper foam. Some colleagues called it slow spring back foam. The technical name was viscoelastic polyurethane foam. Eventually, the world would come to know it simply as memory foam. The testing methods were almost comically simple. Yost and his team placed a piece of the foam on the ground and dropped an egg onto it from waist height. The egg did not crack. They dropped heavier objects. The foam absorbed the impacts without transmitting force to whatever lay beneath. In more formal tests, the foam demonstrated remarkable properties. It absorbed and distributed pressure better than any conventional cushioning material. It conformed to complex shapes without creating pressure points. It responded to body heat, becoming softer and more pliable in contact with warm skin. NASA incorporated the foam into spacecraft seating, where it helped protect astronauts from the violent vibrations of launch and the harsh forces of reentry, but the airline seat redesign project that had spawned the invention was quietly shelved. The industry was not ready for such a radical change. The foam, however, began finding other paths into the world. By the 1970s, companies had licensed the technology for various applications. The Dallas Cowboys football team lined their helmets with temper foam, gaining protection against the repeated impacts that players' heads endured. Military contractors used it inside bulletproof vests, where it helped absorb and spread the blunt force trauma of stopped bullets. Hospitals discovered that the foam could prevent bed sores in patients who were unable to move. The material conformed to their bodies, eliminating the pressure points that caused skin breakdown. Wheelchair manufacturers integrated it into seats for paralyzed patients. Prosthetics companies used it to create more comfortable artificial limbs, conforming to the unique shape of each patient's residual limb. But the breakthrough that brought memory foam into ordinary homes came later, when two Swedish entrepreneurs obtained the formula that NASA had published and began perfecting it for a new application: mattresses. The technology had to be refined. Early memory foam mattresses were too firm and too sensitive to temperature, becoming uncomfortably hard in cold bedrooms. But by the 1990s, improved formulations had solved these problems. Memory foam mattresses offered something genuinely new in the ancient quest for comfortable sleep, a surface that adapted to the sleeper, rather than forcing the sleeper to adapt to it. The market exploded. By 2019, the global memory foam mattress industry had reached nearly $30 billion in annual sales. Television commercials showed wine glasses sitting upright on mattresses while people jumped nearby, demonstrating the material's ability to isolate motion. Mattress stores proliferated in strip malls across America, their showrooms filled with products in various firmness levels, all descended from that original NASA formula. The material appeared in pillows designed to support the neck and reduce snoring. It appeared in couch cushions and office chair seats. It appeared in shoe insoles that promised to cushion every step, making standing and walking more comfortable. Athletic shoes incorporated memory foam to absorb the impact of running on hard surfaces. Motorcycle enthusiasts discovered that memory foam saddles transformed long rides from ordeals into pleasures. The foam conformed to the rider's body, eliminating the pressure points that caused numbness and pain. Custom motorcycle seat manufacturers offered memory foam upgrades, and touring bikers swore by the difference. The medical applications continued to expand. Wheelchair cushions made with memory foam helped prevent the pressure sores that were a constant danger for people who could not shift their weight. Hospital mattresses incorporated the material to protect bedridden patients. Prosthetic limbs used memory foam liners that conformed to the residual limb, improving comfort and reducing irritation. Physical therapy equipment used memory foam to support patients during rehabilitation exercises. Surgical positioning pads protected patients during lengthy operations. Even veterinary medicine adopted the technology, with memory foam beds becoming popular for elderly dogs suffering from arthritis. The material found its way into children's products too. Mattresses for cribs and toddler beds used memory foam to provide comfortable, supportive sleep surfaces. Car seat padding incorporated the material for crash protection. Baby carriers used memory foam inserts to distribute weight and increase comfort for both child and parent. All of it traced back to an engineer trying to make airplane seats safer, applying principles he had learned from helping astronauts survive the shock of returning from space. Charles Yost could never have imagined, when he watched that egg survive its drop onto his new foam, that he was creating a billion-dollar industry. He was just solving a problem. But that solution rippled outward for decades, improving the comfort and safety of millions of people around the world. Feeding astronauts presented another seemingly mundane challenge that generated surprisingly far-reaching solutions. We think of eating as such a simple act that we rarely consider how much infrastructure supports it. Refrigeration keeps food fresh. Cooking makes it palatable. The vast networks of farms and processors and trucks and stores that constitute our food system deliver an endless variety of options to our tables. In space, none of this infrastructure exists. There are no refrigerators powered by electrical outlets. There are no stoves connected to gas lines. There is no running water to clean dishes. And perhaps most fundamentally, there is no gravity to keep food on plates or drinks in cups. The early Mercury astronauts ate food that came squeezed from tubes, like toothpaste, purees and pastes in various flavors, none of them particularly appealing. The texture was mushy, the taste questionable, the experience about as far from a home-cooked meal as possible. Astronaut John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth, dutifully consumed his tube food during his February 1962 flight. He reported that swallowing was no problem in weightlessness, answering a genuine question that scientists had wondered about. But neither he nor any other astronaut expressed enthusiasm about the cuisine. As missions grew longer and astronaut complaints grew louder, NASA knew it needed something better. For the Gemini program of the mid-1960s, the agency contracted with food companies to develop new approaches. Pillsbury, the flour and baking company, received a contract that would change not only space food, but food safety across the entire planet. The challenge was complex. Food for astronauts needed to be lightweight, since every ounce on a spacecraft cost thousands of dollars in fuel to lift. It needed to be shelf-stable, lasting for weeks without refrigeration. It needed to be nutritious, providing the calories and vitamins that active astronauts required. It needed to be easy to prepare in weightlessness. And above all, it needed to be absolutely safe, completely free of bacterial contamination. A case of food poisoning on Earth means a few miserable days. A case of food poisoning in space, inside a tiny capsule with no bathroom facilities and no way to return home, could be catastrophic. Traditional food safety testing was not adequate for NASA's requirements. Inspectors typically tested samples from production batches, assuming that if the samples were safe, the rest of the batch was probably safe too. But probably was not good enough for astronauts. NASA demanded certainty. Pillsbury scientists responded by developing an entirely new approach to food safety, one that focused not on testing finished products but on controlling every step of the production process. They called it the Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point System, HACCP for short. The concept was borrowed from engineering. Instead of hoping nothing went wrong and then checking at the end, HACCP identified every point in the production process where something could go wrong, every critical control point, and established procedures to prevent problems at each one. Temperature controls during cooking, sanitation protocols during packaging, environmental monitoring throughout the facility. If every control point was managed correctly, the reasoning went, the finished product would inevitably be safe. There would be no need to rely on sampling and statistics and probability. Safety would be engineered into the process itself. NASA adopted HACCP for its space food program. The approach proved so successful that it eventually spread far beyond astronaut meals. By the 1990s, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration had mandated HACCP principles for the seafood industry. Later requirements extended to meat processing and juice production. Today, HACCP is the global standard for food safety, used by manufacturers around the world to prevent the contamination events that once sickened thousands of people. Every time you eat a packaged food product that has not made you sick, you are benefiting from a food safety revolution that began with the challenge of feeding astronauts. The food itself evolved along with the safety protocols. Freeze-drying became the signature technology of space cuisine. The process was elegant. Food was cooked, flash frozen to extremely low temperatures, then placed in a vacuum chamber. Under these conditions, the ice in the food did not melt into liquid water. Instead, it sublimated, transitioning directly from solid to gas, leaving behind food that weighed a fraction of its original mass but retained most of its nutritional value and flavor. Astronauts carried pouches of freeze-dried meals that could be rehydrated with water produced by the spacecraft's fuel cells. They squeezed water into the pouches, waited a few minutes for the food to reconstitute, and ate something that resembled actual human cuisine. Shrimp cocktail became a particular favorite. The tang of the cocktail sauce cut through the blandness of space food. Buzz Aldrin praised it enthusiastically. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface and became the first human to stand on another world, he was fueled by freeze-dried bacon cubes, the first food ever consumed on the moon. The technology spread rapidly after the Apollo program ended. Backpackers discovered that freeze-dried meals were perfect for wilderness trips, lightweight on the trail and requiring only boiling water to prepare. A week's worth of food that would have weighed dozens of pounds in its original form could now fit in a backpack weighing just a few pounds. Hikers climbing remote peaks and campers exploring backcountry wilderness carried meals that astronauts had validated on the journey to the moon. Military contractors adopted the technology for combat rations, the meals ready to eat, or MREs, that soldiers have carried into battle zones for decades, incorporate preservation techniques refined by NASA. These rations are designed to survive extreme temperatures, rough handling, and years of storage while still providing nutrition and reasonable palatability. Not everyone loves MREs. Soldiers sometimes joke that the acronym stands for Meals Rejected by Everyone, but they have kept fighting forces fed in conditions where traditional food service would be impossible. Emergency preparedness companies produced freeze-dried foods designed to last for decades in basement storage. When natural disasters strike, when supply chains fail, when families need to survive on what they have stored, freeze-dried foods provide a margin of safety. The preppers who stock their shelves with 25-year survival food kits are benefiting from technology originally designed to feed astronauts on 2-week lunar missions. The sports nutrition industry embraced freeze-drying as well. Protein powders and meal replacements and energy bars use variations of the preservation techniques developed for space. Athletes training for marathons and bodybuilders building muscle, and office workers trying to lose weight all consume products whose manufacturing processes trace back to NASA research. Today, freeze-dried fruits and vegetables line grocery store shelves. Instant coffee relies on similar preservation technology. The camping section of any outdoor store offers dozens of freeze-dried meal options, from beef stroganoff to pad thai to vegetarian chili. A generation of hikers and preppers and busy parents have benefited from technology originally designed to keep astronauts fed on the journey to the moon. The humble bacon cube that Neil Armstrong consumed on the lunar surface has multiplied into a multi-billion-dollar industry of preserved foods that span the globe. The lunar surface presented another peculiar challenge that led to one of the most recognizable spin-offs of the space program. Astronauts needed to collect samples, to drill into the moon's regolith and extract cores for scientific analysis. This required power tools, specifically drills, but the lunar module had no electrical outlets. There is no power grid on the moon. Every tool the astronauts used had to carry its own energy source. NASA turned to Black & Decker, which had developed the first cordless power tools a few years earlier. The concept was simple enough: a motor powered by rechargeable batteries, freeing the user from cords that limited mobility and required access to electrical outlets. But the moon mission demanded something far more sophisticated than anything available commercially. The drill had to function in a vacuum. It had to operate in temperature extremes, from scorching sunlit surfaces to frozen shadows. Its batteries had to hold charges in conditions that would destroy ordinary cells. Its motor had to be efficient enough to perform significant work on limited power. Most importantly, the drill had to be designed for use in the absence of gravity. On Earth, when you drill into something, the resistance pushes back against you, but your feet are planted on the ground, held down by your body weight. In the reduced gravity of the moon, with astronauts weighing only 1/6 of their Earth weight, while wearing bulky spacesuits, conventional drill design would spin the astronaut around instead of driving the bit forward. Black & Decker's engineers worked closely with NASA to solve these problems. They developed motors that were more efficient than anything on the commercial market, extracting maximum work from minimum battery power. They designed control systems that prevented the torque from rotating the user. They created battery management technologies that protected cells from the harsh space environment. The lunar drill worked perfectly. Astronauts on multiple Apollo missions used it to extract core samples that scientists still study today. The technology proved itself in the most demanding conditions imaginable. After the Apollo program wound down, Black & Decker's engineers looked at what they had created and realized its potential extended far beyond the moon. The compact, efficient motors could power household appliances. The battery technology could make all sorts of tools portable. The ergonomic designs could make everyday work easier. In 1979, Black & Decker introduced the Dustbuster, a cordless handheld vacuum cleaner. It became an immediate sensation, selling millions of units and spawning countless imitations. The core technology came directly from the lunar drill program. People who would never visit the moon could clean their cars and couches with devices whose ancestry reached all the way to the Sea of Tranquility. Today, cordless power tools are ubiquitous. Drills and circular saws and sanders and grinders all run on rechargeable batteries descended from NASA technology. The improvement in battery technology has been dramatic. Early cordless tools could barely complete a single task before needing a recharge. Modern lithium-ion batteries, themselves descendants of research partly funded by the space program, provide power for hours of continuous use. The professional contractor working on construction sites carries a kit of cordless tools that would have seemed like science fiction to builders of the 1960s. Cordless reciprocating saws cut through studs. Cordless impact drivers sink lag bolts. Cordless nail guns frame entire houses. The freedom from cords and compressors and electrical outlets has transformed construction work. Home improvement has been democratized by these tools. Homeowners who once would have hired professionals for simple repairs now tackle projects themselves, equipped with cordless drills and drivers and flashlights that run for hours on a single charge. The weekend warrior building a deck or installing a ceiling fan uses technology designed for astronauts. Lawn care has gone cordless too. Battery-powered mowers and trimmers and leaf blowers have replaced their gasoline counterparts in many yards. The motors that originally extracted core samples from the lunar surface now trim hedges in suburban neighborhoods. Even medical devices have benefited from the cordless technology developed for space. Portable defibrillators, the devices that can restart stopped hearts, use battery technology refined through decades of aerospace research. Emergency medical technicians carry them in ambulances, and automated external defibrillators hang on walls in gyms and airports, ready to save lives when needed. The portable monitoring equipment that paramedics use to assess patients in the field descends from the compact, reliable electronics developed for spacecraft. Heart monitors, blood pressure cuffs, pulse oximeters, all of these devices have been miniaturized and improved through technologies whose roots lie in the space program. The medical contributions of the space program are perhaps less visible to most people than the electronic gadgets and household products, but they may ultimately prove more profound. From the earliest days of human spaceflight, NASA was obsessively concerned with astronaut health. The agency was sending human beings into an environment utterly hostile to life, trusting them to technology that had never been tested with human occupants, launching them on rockets that had sometimes exploded spectacularly on the launch pad. Mission controllers needed constant, real-time information about how their astronauts were faring. They needed to know immediately if something went wrong. This requirement drove the development of biomedical telemetry systems that could measure vital signs, heart rate, blood pressure, respiration rate, body temperature, and transmit that data continuously across thousands of miles. The sensors had to be small enough that astronauts could wear them comfortably for extended periods. The transmission systems had to be reliable enough that critical information was never lost. The data had to be accurate enough for flight surgeons to make life or death decisions based on numbers appearing on screens in mission control. Throughout the 1960s, NASA engineers refined these systems through the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. They developed sensors that could be worn against the skin, adhered to the chest with simple patches. They created data transmission protocols that could compress vital sign information into radio signals. They built display systems that let doctors monitor multiple patients simultaneously. By the late 1960s, these technologies had proven themselves in the most challenging conditions possible, and hospitals began taking notice. The Apollo 70 cardiac care monitoring system, developed by a company called Space Labs in partnership with NASA, became one of the first space-derived technologies to be widely adopted in medicine. Neil Armstrong wore Spacelab sensors on his historic moonwalk. Within a few years, cardiac patients in hospitals across America and Europe wore similar sensors, their heart rhythms watched continuously by nurses at monitoring stations. The impact was profound. Before continuous monitoring, patients could suffer cardiac events without anyone noticing until a nurse happened to check on them. The delay between an arrhythmia and its detection might be the difference between life and death. With telemetry systems watching constantly, abnormalities triggered immediate alarms. Response times shrank from minutes to seconds. The technology evolved and spread. Intensive care units became forests of monitoring equipment, each patient connected to systems that tracked vital signs around the clock. Ambulances carried portable monitors that began treatment before patients reached the hospital. Eventually, wireless monitors allowed patients to be tracked from home, transforming the management of chronic conditions. The diagnostic imaging technologies that now let doctors see inside the human body without surgery also owe debts to the space program. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the facility that managed most of NASA's unmanned planetary missions, developed sophisticated techniques for processing images from space probes. Pictures from distant planets arrived on Earth as radio signals, faint and noisy, degraded by millions of miles of transmission. JPL engineers learned to clean up these images, to enhance them, to extract information that seemed buried in static. They developed computer algorithms for image processing, for sharpening details, for revealing features that the human eye could not see in the raw data. These same techniques proved useful for medical imaging. CT scanners, which create detailed images of internal body structures by combining multiple X-ray views, benefited from image processing methods developed for space photography. MRI machines, which use magnetic fields rather than radiation, employed similar enhancement techniques. The infrared sensors used to measure the temperatures of distant stars found an unexpected application in medicine. Diatech Corporation, working with NASA, developed an ear thermometer that measures temperature by detecting the infrared radiation emitted by the eardrum. The technology borrowed directly from astronomical instruments. Today, these thermometers are so common that they seem unremarkable, but they represent a direct transfer from space technology to everyday healthcare. The list of medical spin-offs continues. Programmable pacemakers that can be adjusted without surgery, insulin pumps that deliver precisely controlled doses, prosthetic limbs with improved comfort and function, using materials and designs developed for spacesuits and spacecraft. Even robotic surgery owes something to space. The remote manipulator arms developed for the Space Shuttle and International Space Station, capable of delicate maneuvers in the weightlessness of orbit, inspired engineers to develop similar systems for operating rooms. Surgeons can now perform complex procedures through tiny incisions, their hands controlling robotic instruments with precision impossible through human touch alone. The cameras that now occupy every smartphone, enabling billions of photographs to be taken every day, represent another thread that weaves back to the space program. In the early 1960s, a visionary engineer named Eugene Lally at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory began thinking about how to take pictures in space. The cameras of the era were bulky devices dependent on film that had to be physically returned to Earth for processing. For missions to distant planets, this was impractical. Film could not survive the years-long journeys. Even for lunar missions, the weight and bulk of traditional cameras posed problems. Lally imagined something different: lightweight electronic sensors that could capture images digitally and transmit them instantly across vast distances. He proposed mosaics of light-sensitive elements, each one recording the intensity of light falling upon it, together forming pictures that existed as numbers rather than as chemical patterns on film. The technology did not yet exist to build what Lally envisioned, but his ideas planted seeds that would bear fruit decades later. NASA continued investing in digital imaging technology, funding research at JPL and elsewhere. The agency needed cameras for its planetary probes, cameras that could function for years in the harsh environment of space, and send their pictures home as radio signals. In the 1990s, a JPL scientist named Eric Fossum achieved a breakthrough that would transform photography forever. He was trying to miniaturize cameras for interplanetary missions, to create imagers small enough to fit on tiny spacecraft. The technology he developed was the CMOS active pixel sensor. CMOS sensors could convert light into electrical signals more efficiently than previous technologies. They consumed less power. They could be manufactured using standard integrated circuit fabrication techniques, making them cheap to produce in volume. And they could be made very, very small. Today, CMOS sensors are everywhere. They are in the cameras of virtually every smartphone, enabling the billions of photographs uploaded to social media every day. Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok would not exist without the imaging technology that NASA helped pioneer. The sensors appear in webcams that connect colleagues across continents for video meetings. They fill security cameras monitoring homes and businesses. They operate in medical imaging equipment, in automotive backup cameras, in action cameras capturing extreme sports footage. The GoPro cameras that skydivers and surfers and mountain bikers strap to their helmets use CMOS sensors directly descended from NASA research. The doorbell cameras that record package deliveries and visitors use the same technology. The dash cameras that protect drivers from false insurance claims contain sensors whose development was funded in part by the need to photograph distant planets. Astronomy itself has been transformed by digital imaging technology. Modern telescopes use CMOS and CCD sensors to capture light from distant galaxies, recording images that would have been impossible with film. The Hubble Space Telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope, and countless ground-based observatories all depend on digital imaging technology whose origins lie in the space race. Scientific research across many fields has benefited. Biologists photograph cells and tissues with digital microscopes. Geologists record rock formations. Archaeologists document excavation sites. The ability to capture, store, analyze, and share images digitally has accelerated discovery across the sciences. The technology that allows you to video chat with a friend across the world or take a selfie on vacation descends directly from the effort to build cameras for missions to other planets. The ripples from the space race continue spreading even now, more than half a century after Neil Armstrong's footprint pressed into the lunar dust. Consider the scratch-resistant lenses in your eyeglasses, developed from coatings designed to protect astronaut helmet visors from the scratching of lunar dust. Consider the improved radial tires on your car, which use synthetic fibers originally developed for parachute shrouds. Consider the smoke detectors protecting your home, which employ ionization technology refined for spacecraft fire detection. Consider the invisible water purification systems that make tap water safe to drink, using filtration methods developed to recycle water aboard spacecraft. Consider the athletic shoes on your feet, engineered using principles of shock absorption and aerodynamics that NASA helped pioneer. Consider the thermal blankets in emergency kits, reflecting body heat back at survivors using materials first developed to protect spacecraft from temperature extremes. Athletes benefit from swimsuits designed using NASA wind tunnel testing, their surfaces optimized to reduce drag through water. Firefighters wear gear made from heat-resistant materials developed for spacesuits, surviving temperatures that would destroy ordinary fabric. Rescue workers employ lightweight equipment whose strength-to-weight ratios derive from aerospace engineering. Even everyday conveniences trace unexpected paths back to the space program. The adjustable grooves cut into highway surfaces to reduce hydroplaning were developed by NASA to improve runway safety for the space shuttle. The freeze-dried foods in your pantry, the cordless appliances in your kitchen, the digital images on your screens all carry invisible stamps that read, "Made possible by Apollo." Since 1976, NASA has published an annual report called Spin-Off, documenting the commercial applications of space technology. As of recent counts, over 2,000 individual products and technologies have been featured in these reports. But the true number is certainly far higher, as many innovations have spread so thoroughly into everyday life that their space-age origins have been forgotten or were never formally traced. The space race was expensive. The Apollo program alone consumed over $25 billion in the currency of the 1960s, equivalent to well over $200 billion today when adjusted for inflation. At its peak, the program consumed nearly 4% of the entire federal budget. Critics questioned whether such expenditures could be justified. Surely that money could have been better spent solving problems here on Earth, feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, curing diseases. Why spend billions reaching for a dead rock in the sky when so many people suffered here below? The question was sincere, and it deserved a serious answer. What the critics failed to fully appreciate was that the money was spent on Earth. Every dollar of the Apollo budget went to American workers, American factories, American laboratories. Engineers and technicians earned salaries that supported families and communities. Factories hummed with activity, employing workers who might otherwise have been unemployed. The economic activity rippled outward through suppliers and subcontractors and local businesses. More importantly, the technologies that emerged from that spending have generated economic returns many times greater than the original investment. The semiconductor industry alone, built on the foundation that NASA's demand for integrated circuits established, has generated trillions of dollars of economic activity. The communications industry enabled by satellite technology has transformed global commerce. The medical devices derived from space research have saved countless lives and improved countless more. The return on investment, calculated purely in economic terms, has been extraordinary. But perhaps the greatest return cannot be measured in dollars. The space race demonstrated something profound about human potential. When a society commits itself to an ambitious goal, when it mobilizes its brightest minds and gives them the resources and freedom to innovate, the results cascade outward in ways that no one can predict. We live in an age of remarkable challenges. Climate change threatens ecosystems. Diseases spread across continents. Energy systems strain under growing demand. Population growth puts pressure on resources. These problems can seem overwhelming, impossible beyond human capacity to solve. But the space race teaches us something important about that sense of impossibility. In 1961, landing a man on the moon seemed equally impossible. The technology did not exist. The expertise did not exist. The very idea seemed like science fiction rather than serious engineering. And yet, within 8 years, human beings walked on another world. They returned safely to Earth. They brought back samples that scientists still study today. The impossible became not just possible but actual. The technologies that emerged from that effort transformed the world in ways that Kennedy never anticipated when he issued his famous challenge. The problems he was trying to solve, beating the Soviets, demonstrating American technological superiority, those problems have faded into history. But the solutions, the integrated circuits and satellite communications and memory foam and freeze-dried food and cordless tools and medical monitors, those solutions remain, woven into the fabric of daily life. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the space race is that ambitious goals have unexpected benefits. When you push hard enough at the boundaries of what is possible, you do not just reach your stated destination, you create technologies and knowledge and capabilities that find applications you never imagined. The engineers working on the Apollo guidance computer were not trying to invent the smartphone. They were just trying to land astronauts on the moon. The scientists developing freeze-dried food were not planning to revolutionize emergency preparedness. They were just trying to keep astronauts fed. The inventors of memory foam were not dreaming of billion-dollar mattress empires. They were just trying to make aircraft seats safer. But that is how innovation works. Solve one problem, and you often discover that your solution applies to dozens of problems you never considered. Push the boundaries of what is possible, and you expand the boundaries for everyone who comes after you. As you lie here tonight, perhaps drifting toward sleep, surrounded by the invisible inheritance of the space race, consider for a moment the enormity of what happened in that remarkable decade. A young president, barely 40 years old, stood before Congress and issued a challenge that many thought impossible. Landing a man on the moon before 1970 seemed like science fiction, a goal suitable for fantasy novels rather than federal budgets. The Soviet Union had beaten America into space. The gap seemed insurmountable. But Kennedy understood something about human nature that the cautious voices did not. He understood that people rise to meet great challenges. He understood that ambition inspires effort in ways that modest goals do not. He understood that the impossible, clearly stated and passionately pursued, becomes achievable. His speech was not just about the moon. It was about what America could become if it committed itself fully to excellence. It was about proving that free people working together in open competition could outperform any other system. It was about inspiring a generation to study science and engineering, to push boundaries, to dream big dreams. A nation rose to meet that challenge. Hundreds of thousands of engineers and scientists and technicians and factory workers bent their efforts toward a single purpose. They worked in laboratories and launch facilities, in factories and offices, in machine shops and testing ranges. They came from every state, every background, every walk of life. They were united by a shared goal that seemed crazy at first, but became their obsession. They worked themselves to exhaustion, solving problems that had never been solved before, creating technologies that had never existed. Some of them worked so hard that their marriages crumbled. Some damaged their health. A few gave their lives, victims of accidents in the dangerous business of spaceflight. The three Apollo 1 astronauts who died in a launch pad fire in January 1967 are rightly remembered as heroes who gave everything in service to the dream. Many of them did not live to see how their work would transform the world. Charles Yost, the inventor of memory foam, passed away in 2005, having watched his creation spread into mattresses and medical equipment and countless other applications. The engineers at MIT who designed the Apollo guidance computer never imagined that their descendants would be personal computers and smartphones used by billions of people. They were not trying to change daily life on Earth. They were trying to reach the moon. But in doing so, they gave us gifts that we unwrap every single day without even realizing it. The phone resting on your nightstand, the mattress cradling your body, the satellite signals that connect you to the world, the medical devices that might someday save your life, the food that will nourish you tomorrow morning, the cordless tools in your garage, the cameras that capture your memories. All of it came from the stars. Before we reach the end of our journey tonight, let me share with you a few more remarkable threads from this extraordinary era. Stories that illuminate just how deeply the space race penetrated into corners of life we rarely think about. The firefighters who rush into burning buildings today owe their lives in part to materials born from the space program. When NASA needed to protect astronauts from the searing heat of re-entry, temperatures that would vaporize ordinary metals, engineers developed new heat-resistant materials that could maintain their integrity under the most extreme conditions imaginable. These materials found their way into firefighting equipment. The turnout coats that protect firefighters from flames, the breathing apparatus that allows them to enter smoke-filled rooms, even the reflective surfaces on fire trucks that help them stay visible at night, all trace some portion of their DNA back to the space program. The improvements have been incremental but cumulative. Modern firefighting gear is dramatically more protective than what was available before the space race, and those improvements have saved thousands of lives. Athletes have benefited too, in ways that might surprise you. When NASA built wind tunnels to test the aerodynamics of spacecraft and aircraft, the facilities attracted researchers from other fields. Sports scientists realized that the same principles governing airflow around rockets applied to swimmers moving through water and runners cutting through air. The LZR Racer swimsuit, introduced by Speedo in collaboration with NASA, used polyurethane panels positioned based on wind tunnel testing to reduce drag. When athletes wearing the suit began shattering world records at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, breaking 13 records in a single event, the swimming world took notice. The suit was eventually banned from competition as providing too much technological advantage, but the principle had been proven. Aerospace engineering could revolutionize athletic performance. Running shoes, too, have evolved along lines influenced by space research. The shock-absorbing materials that cushion each footfall, the aerodynamic designs that reduce wind resistance, the lightweight synthetic materials that replace heavier traditional fabrics, all show the fingerprints of the space era. Even the golf balls that fly across courses on weekend mornings have been improved by aerospace engineering. The dimple patterns on modern golf balls, which create turbulent airflow that allows the ball to travel farther and straighter, were optimized using the same computational fluid dynamics techniques that NASA uses to design spacecraft. The invisible systems that keep modern life functioning smoothly include many space-derived technologies. The Global Positioning System, GPS, which guides your car to unfamiliar addresses and helps delivery drivers find your home, is fundamentally a space technology. 24 satellites orbit the Earth, constantly broadcasting signals that allow receivers to calculate their position with remarkable precision. GPS grew out of the Navy's need to guide ballistic missile submarines and the Air Force's requirement for precise targeting. But the underlying technology, using satellite signals to determine location, was pioneered during the early space age. Today, GPS is so woven into the fabric of modern life that its failure would cripple transportation, logistics, emergency services, and countless other systems we depend on daily. Weather forecasting has been transformed by satellites that watch the Earth's atmosphere continuously from orbit. Before the space age, meteorologists relied on ground stations and weather balloons, getting snapshots of atmospheric conditions at scattered points. They could see that a storm was approaching from the west, but they had limited ability to track its movement or predict its path. Satellites changed everything. Weather satellites now photograph the entire planet multiple times per day, tracking cloud formations and storm systems as they develop and move. Hurricane tracks can be predicted days in advance, giving residents time to evacuate. Tornado warnings, based on satellite imagery and ground radar, save hundreds of lives each year. The climate science that informs our understanding of Earth's changing environment depends heavily on satellites. Instruments in orbit measure sea surface temperatures, ice sheet thickness, forest coverage, atmospheric composition, the data streams, and continuously building the picture that climate scientists use to understand how our planet is changing. None of this would be possible without the infrastructure of satellite technology that the space race built. Inside your kitchen, space technology influences your morning routine in ways you might not expect. The water you drink may have been purified using filtration methods developed for spacecraft. NASA needed ways to recycle water aboard long-duration missions, since carrying enough water from Earth was impractical. The filtration systems they developed could remove contaminants and purify wastewater to drinking standards. These same technologies now clean municipal water supplies and fill the filters in home pitchers. The silver ionization systems used in some water treatment facilities trace back to NASA's need to prevent bacterial growth in spacecraft water systems. The insulation in your walls may use technology related to the thermal protection systems on rockets. NASA needed lightweight, highly efficient insulation to protect cryogenic fuel tanks and spacecraft from temperature extremes. The principles developed for space applications were adapted for terrestrial buildings, improving energy efficiency and reducing heating and cooling costs. Even the non-stick coatings on some cookware, while not actually invented by NASA as popular legend sometimes claims, were popularized partly through association with the space program. Teflon, which had been invented in the 1930s, was used in spacesuits and spacecraft, gaining visibility that helped it spread into consumer products. The entertainment systems that occupy your evenings owe debts to the space race as well. Video compression algorithms, which allow streaming services to deliver movies to your television without overwhelming your internet connection, evolved from techniques developed to compress and transmit data from space probes across millions of miles with limited bandwidth. The noise-canceling headphones you might use to block out distractions employ technology that NASA developed to protect astronauts' hearing from the roar of rocket engines. The surround sound systems that make movie explosions feel immersive use audio processing techniques refined for spacecraft communication systems. Even the humble barcode scanner at grocery checkout owes something to the space program. Barcodes existed before NASA took interest, but the agency needed ways to track the thousands of components in spacecraft and the inventory at launch facilities. NASA's work on improving barcode systems and integrating them into computerized tracking databases helped establish the infrastructure that now underlies retail logistics worldwide. The medical imaging technologies we discussed earlier continue to evolve, with space research contributing new advances. NASA's work on monitoring astronaut vision during long-duration spaceflight has contributed to ophthalmology. The agency's research into bone density loss in microgravity has advanced our understanding of osteoporosis. Studies of cardiovascular changes in space inform treatment of heart conditions on Earth. Telemedicine, the practice of delivering medical care remotely using telecommunications, was pioneered partly to allow doctors on Earth to advise astronauts in space. Today, telemedicine allows rural patients to consult specialists hundreds of miles away. During recent years, it has allowed medical care to continue even when in-person visits were impossible or inadvisable. The robotic surgery systems that allow doctors to perform delicate procedures through tiny incisions have their roots in the remote manipulator systems developed for space. The Da Vinci surgical robot, used in hundreds of thousands of procedures each year, employs principles of remote manipulation that were refined for tasks like repairing satellites in orbit. Pharmaceutical research has benefited from experiments conducted in space. The microgravity environment allows protein crystals to grow larger and more perfectly formed than they can on Earth. These crystals help researchers understand the structure of proteins, information crucial for designing drugs to treat diseases. Several drugs currently in development were informed by crystallography experiments performed aboard the Space Shuttle and International Space Station. The mental health support systems used in space have found applications on Earth as well. NASA developed techniques for helping astronauts cope with isolation, confinement, and stress during long missions. These same techniques have been adapted to help people in isolated professions, from submarine crews to Antarctic researchers to workers in remote locations. The space race even influenced agriculture in unexpected ways. NASA's research into growing plants in controlled environments, motivated by the need to someday provide fresh food for Mars missions, has contributed to the development of vertical farms and indoor agriculture systems. LED lighting optimized for plant growth, hydroponic nutrient delivery systems, and environmental control technologies all show NASA's influence. The precision agriculture systems that allow farmers to optimize their use of water, fertilizer, and pesticides depend on GPS for field mapping and satellite imagery for crop monitoring. Farmers can now identify exactly which parts of their fields need more water or fertilizer, reducing waste and environmental impact while increasing yields. These are not obscure or marginal technologies. They are central to modern life, woven into the fabric of daily existence so thoroughly that we no longer notice them. The space race did not simply deposit a few gadgets into the consumer marketplace. It fundamentally transformed the technological foundation of civilization. And what of the human element in all of this? The engineers and scientists who made these breakthroughs possible were, for the most part, ordinary people doing extraordinary work. They went home to families at night. They worried about mortgages and car payments and their children's report cards. They got tired and frustrated and wondered sometimes if the goal was achievable. But they kept working. They kept solving problems. They kept pushing forward because they believed that what they were doing mattered. Many of them worked themselves to exhaustion. Some sacrificed their health. A few gave their lives, victims of accidents in the dangerous business of spaceflight. The astronauts get most of the glory, and rightfully so. They accepted risks that would make most people tremble, climbing aboard rockets that were controlled explosions pointed at the sky, trusting their lives to machines built by people they would never meet. The three Apollo 1 astronauts who died in a launch pad fire in January 1967 are rightly remembered as heroes who gave everything in service to the dream. But behind every astronaut stood thousands of workers whose names appear in no history books. The technicians who assembled the rockets, checking and rechecking every connection, the programmers who wrote the code for the guidance computers, knowing that a single bug could doom a mission, the women who wove the memory cores by hand, thread by thread, creating the brains that would navigate to the moon. The safety inspectors who caught problems before they became disasters, the quality control specialists who rejected parts that did not meet specifications even when schedules demanded shortcuts, the flight controllers who monitored every system and stood ready to make split-second decisions that meant life or death. None of them set out to change your daily life. They were trying to land a man on the moon. But the technology they created, forged in the pressure of that magnificent goal, spread outward like ripples on a pond, touching everything in its path. The space race ended officially in 1975, when American and Soviet spacecraft docked together in orbit and astronauts shook hands in the void between worlds. But the technologies it spawned continue evolving, continue spreading, continue improving our lives in ways large and small. Every advancement builds on what came before. Every innovation opens doors to innovations not yet imagined. The integrated circuits of the 1960s became the microprocessors of the 1970s, became the personal computers of the 1980s, became the internet of the 1990s, became the smartphones of the 2000s, became the artificial intelligence of today. Each step was enabled by the steps that came before. Looking back at that remarkable era, it is easy to be inspired. A generation of dreamers looked up at the moon and decided that it was not too far to reach. They faced problems that seemed impossible and solved them anyway. And in solving them, they changed the world in ways they could not have anticipated. Tonight, as you rest, you carry their legacy with you. Tomorrow, when you wake, you will encounter it again, in a dozen ways you will never notice, and a few you might. That is the invisible gift of the space race. It is woven so deeply into our daily lives that we have forgotten it was ever extraordinary. But it was extraordinary. It still is. And understanding where these technologies came from reminds us of something important, that humans working together toward ambitious goals are capable of wonders beyond imagining. So let the gentle weight of history settle over you now. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. Let your breathing slow. Feel the mattress beneath you, memory foam or not, cradling your body as you drift towards sleep. Listen, if you like, for the satellites passing silently overhead, carrying signals around the world. Dream perhaps of distant moons and brilliant engineers and a decade when anything seemed possible. Dream of the quiet women weaving circuits by hand, thread by thread, building the brains that would guide astronauts across the void. Dream of the scientists hunched over equations late into the night, calculating trajectories that would carry human beings to another world. Dream of the technicians and machinists and inspectors and controllers, thousands of them, each playing their part in the greatest adventure humanity had ever undertaken. Dream of the astronauts who risked everything to walk on another world, knowing that the smallest failure could mean they would never return home. Their work surrounds you now, invisible and everywhere. It will be there when you wake. It will be there tomorrow and the day after, and every day that follows. The space race changed everything, and we are all its heirs. The mattress beneath you, the phone on your nightstand, the satellite signals crossing the sky above your roof, the medical equipment in hospitals across town, the food in your pantry, the tools in your garage, the camera that captured your last family photograph. All of it flows from that remarkable decade when humanity reached for the stars. Thank you for spending this evening with me, dear friends. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please do take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows these stories to reach more listeners around the world, and I am grateful for every single one of you. Ring that notification bell if you would like to know when new videos are posted. And if you are looking for more tales from the past, there is a whole library waiting for you on this channel. Explore other eras, other places, other moments when history pivoted in surprising directions. If you are drifting off now, let me wish you the most peaceful sleep, filled with the kind of dreams that the engineers of the space age must have dreamed before they made them real. Good night, dear friends, wherever in the world you are listening from, and sleep well.